Guru Maharaj ॐ ह्रीं ऋतं तमचलो गुणजित गुणेभ्यः नाक्तां तेवां सकरुणां तव पादपद्मं मोहाङ्कुशां बहुकृतां न भजे जतोऽहं तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो भक्तिर्भगश्च भजनं भवभेदकारे गच्छन्तलं सुविपुलं गमनाय तात्वं वक्त्रधृतोऽपि हृदये न मे भाति किञ्चित् तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो तेजस्तरन्ति तरसा त्वयि तृप्ततृष्णा रागे कृते ऋतपथे त्वयि रामकृष्णे मार्तामृतं तव पदं मरणोर्विनाशां तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो कृत्यं करोति कलुषां कुहकान्तकारे स्नान्तं शिवां शुभिमालं तव नामनाथ यस्मादहं त्वशरणो जगदेकगम्य तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ सर्वमङ्गल मङ्गले शिवे सर्वार्थसाधिके शरणे नारायणी नमोस्तुते सृष्टि स्थिति विनाशानां शक्तिभूते Gunasraye Gunamaye Narayani Namostute Sharanagata Dinarta Paritrana Parayane Sarvashyarte Hare Devi Narayani Namostute Jayo Narayani Namostute Jayo Narayani Namostute Jayo Narayani Namostute Jayo Narayani Namostute जय महामाई की जय जय भगवान श्री रामकृष्ण देव की जय जय स्वामी जी महाराज जी की जय
Namah Shri Atirajaya Vivekananda Sure Satchit Sukhaswarupaya Swamineta Paharine. So this part of this lecture of Vivekananda, Maya and the Evolution of the Concept of God, he compares and contrasts two societies, essentially the Oriental and the Occidental, meaning largely the Indian society and the American society. And there are 2 points that he raises, and we'll get into that. The Indian society was rather open as far as religious opinion was concerned, but cramped and conservative as far as social structure is concerned. And the opposite obtained in the US when he was visiting. I mean, he noted the great liberalism of the society, but coupled with that, or in England, but coupled with that, there was this conservatism in religious matters. So these two essential points of comparison and contrast is something that he is going to bring up now. And the conclusion that he draws from this is that the real condition for growth is liberty, freedom. Without the freedom to investigate freely, openly, whatever might be the direction of that investigation leading to truth, without that liberty, real growth is not possible. This is the point that he is going to make through various illustrations. And so more than 2 weeks back, we had concluded with this bunch of instances that he gave, where somebody was probably excommunicated in some society. Why? Because he had just gone to see the first railway train, and he sort of jokes, we'll presume that was not true. On the other hand, this is in an Indian society he's talking about. On the other hand, and this is a point that he brings up, in religion, we find atheists, materialists and Buddhists, creeds, opinions and speculations of every phase and variety, some of a most startling character, living side by side. Preachers of all sects go about teaching and getting adherents, and at the very gates of the temples of gods, the Brahmins, to their credit be it said, allow even the materialists to stand and give forth their opinions. This really is a hallmark of growth and maturity, not in a social sense as he has emphasized, but in the context, in the framework of spiritual investigation, or what is generally known as religion. And then he gives this instance: Buddha died at a ripe old age. I remember a friend of mine, a great American scientist, who was fond of reading his life, reading the life of the Buddha. He did not like the death of Buddha because he was not crucified. What a false idea. For a man to be great, he must be murdered. Such ideas never prevailed in India. This great Buddha traveled all over India, denouncing her gods and even the God of the universe, and yet he lived to a good old age. For 80 years he lived and had converted half the country. Then there were the Charvakas, who preached horrible things. The most rank undisguised materialism, such as in the 19th century they dare not openly preach. Yavad jivet sukham jivet rinam kritva ghritam pivet. This is the sort of quick slogan, quick summary of, partly as a joke, but essentially, I mean, this is sort of a one-line summary of the Charvaka materialist philosophy. Namely, as long as one lives, one should live happily, and even if one has to borrow money, so be it, and borrow money and have, well, delicacies. Here it's basically ghritam, meaning clarified butter, symbol of luxury. So even if one has to borrow money to enjoy a luxurious life, so be it. Well, it's basically in the West, this is the kind of thing that was called hedonism. The Charvaka himself is supposed to have been a great sage who, in his personal life, was very austere, regardless of the philosophy that was there. These Charvakas were allowed to preach from temple to temple and city to city that religion was all nonsense, that it was priestcraft, that the Vedas were the words and writings of fools, rogues, and demons, and that there was neither God nor an eternal soul. If there was a soul, why did it not come back after death, drawn by the love of wife and child? Bhasmi bhutasya dehasya punaragamanam kutah. After the body has been burnt to ashes, what and where will things come back to life? This is sort of the most materialist point of view, but these were things that they had said. If there was a soul, why did it not come back after death, drawn by the love of wife and child? Their idea was that if there was a soul, it must still love after death and want good things to eat and nice dresses, etc., etc. Yet no one heard these Charvakas. So he has given here two examples. First, Buddhists. The Buddha himself, in a different place, Vivekananda describes the Buddha as the one man without any cobwebs in his head, without any obscure thinking, without any lack of clarity. His thinking was as clear as can be, and even today, after 2,500 years, we are amazed at the level of clarity and precision that Buddha brings to the table. And it is that thought, even today, which has been taken up by people who are inclined to a clear, rational, scientific investigation of truth. And in a certain sense, Advaita Vedanta, which came subsequently, owes a considerable amount, both in terms of its philosophy and in terms of its logic and analysis and its capacity for analysis, to the Buddhist philosophers. Post-Buddha, perhaps the greatest philosopher after the Buddha was Nagarjuna. Yeah? And a lot of the Advaita Vedantic philosophy and its method of analysis is borrowed to a great extent from these great philosophers of yore. Anyway, so this is, so essentially it's a way of thought that did get incorporated into the body, into the corpus of Indian thought. Yeah? Philosophy and analytical philosophy particularly, not mythology, not stories, but the core analytical philosophy and the empirical method of studying that was there. Essentially, what was it that was emphasized? Basically, that look, we are going around with our minds all the time. The present day description of science that we have, typically not for the informed, but typically, the common sense understanding that most people have is conflating it with matter. They forget to recognize that the discovery of the scientific law, the discovery of knowledge itself, is something that is evoked in the human heart as something that is universal, that is common to all. This is the hallmark of science, the universality of knowledge, of truth. And it's this particular aspect that we find both in several of the schools of Buddhism, particularly Madhyamaka, and in Advaita Vedanta. Essentially, you don't have to assume premises, but starting with our naive day-to-day experience, take that as your raw data, analyze and extract knowledge. Not just theoretical knowledge, but knowledge translated into a worldview, translated into practice. This is exactly what science is about, except that in this particular case, that science has as its object of study the internal organ, namely the human mind. Yeah? This is a laboratory. This psychophysical organism, which we call us or which we call I, is a laboratory that's there with us all the time. But we ignore it. We don't look at it, we don't pay attention to it, except when it's ill, except when it starts causing pain and agony. On the other hand, most of our human miseries are an effect of not being able to handle this laboratory, which is part and parcel of us in our day-to-day lives. What does this kind of philosophy, the Buddhist philosophy or Advaita Vedanta, do? It takes that as the starting point. When you read Vedanta, you come across these words, Vyavaharika Satya, which means, in practice, what is it? Mind only that it's not a third-person perspective, it's a first-person perspective. But being a first-person perspective is not really that much of a drawback, because finally our discoveries of laws are also first-person discoveries. And here, what the laws that are being discovered and analyzed and put forth are laws of functioning of the human mind. So the start off with the human mind, with the individual mind as your laboratory. Look at it, study it, pick out information through a pure empirical study. This functions this way. No good, no bad, no value judgment. But this is how my mind functions. From a detached perspective, studying and culling out that data, that knowledge. Step one. So this is essentially performing the experiments called observation or observations. Yeah? But the object that is being observed is one's own mind. After having culled out that data, that information, what are we going to do with it? That is going to be then distilled through a process of analysis. That's exactly what happens. There are these huge telescopes which look out into the heavens, collect data from there in terms of starlight coming in. They collect that data. That's just raw data. Here also we do the same thing. We study our mind and then understand this mind functions such and such way. So we observe. That's just a tabulation of fact, raw data. Second, analysis, in order to cull out of all of that certain common principles. This is the product of analysis. After analyzing data, you systematize that data. This is conversion of information or data into some kind of knowledge. Yeah? That's basically crystallizing all that into certain unified principles. That's the second stage, analysis. Finally, the third stage, after you have analyzed it, After you have culled this knowledge out of the raw data, that is our mind, how to use it for our good. For our good means not the individual good only, but also a collective good. Finally, there's a seeking of satisfaction, joy, etc., etc. And so, how are we going to put this knowledge of our subject, of our subjective reality into practice? This third level of translating knowledge into action so that it can be of larger benefit is what's called wisdom. There are Sanskrit terms for all of this. The first level of observation, typically it's construed as reading, yeah. So basically, shravana or hearing, shravana. But there's also another Sanskrit word for this. It's called swadhyaya. Swa-adhyayana. Iti swadhyaya. So what is swadhyaya? Here you could interpret it in two ways. It could be quietly studying on one's own. This is the same as the level of shravana, reading scriptures, hearing what people who have gone through this have to say to us. This is, in Vedanta, this is called shravana, reading serious literature or serious books having to do with this kind of analysis, also called shravana. But swadhyaya has a different meaning. Swasya adhyayanam. And that's what is relevant here. What is swasya adhyayanam? Studying oneself. Swasya, of oneself. Adhyayana, study. Study of oneself is also called swadhyaya. It's not just books, but the study of one's mind in order to cull out this data. The first step, shravana in Vedanta and swadhyaya, it's basically the same thing. And culling out that data, step 1. Step 2, analysis of that data to get unifying principles. Third, translation of that knowledge into action in order to be something that is enriching both to oneself and to others. Yeah. So essentially, holding on to the conclusions of this analysis. Yeah. All right. This aspect of it has been something that has been common to both the Buddhist school of thought and the Vedantic school of thought. And what is the result of this kind of broad structural analysis in our subjective lives? That's what he takes up next. Thus, India has always had this magnificent idea of religious freedom. And you must remember that freedom is the first condition of growth. What you do not make free will never grow. The idea that you can make others grow and help their growth, that you can direct and guide them, always retaining for yourself the freedom of the teacher, is nonsense. A dangerous lie which has retarded the growth of millions and millions of human beings in this world. That men have the light of liberty. That is the only condition of growth. Here he makes this point very emphatically, that the real reason why there has been such a fruition of various kinds of religious ideas and spiritual ideas, including materialistic ones, including agnostic ones like Buddhism, the real reason for this proliferation of ideas and this rich fabric of thought in this country is precisely this liberty, this freedom. Take that away, and this great tradition falls to pieces. So if you hear somebody that saying things like, we have this great tradition, and say that on the one hand, and on the next moment, denouncing some others as, oh, these are lower creatures, they have no understanding, etc., etc., be rest assured that that person pays only lip service to this glorious tradition of liberty. Because somebody who has actually derived benefit from this liberal thought cannot possibly bring oneself to denounce, because that is anathema to this theme of development based on freedom, based on liberty. These two positions, one of liberty, which is justifiably something to be proud of. Why? Because it gives rise to fruition, to development of great ideas, on the one hand. Two, a denouncing of others because somehow or the other they are not of this thought. It just means that the person who is making these statements is actually contradicting himself or herself. That first statement about taking glory in something that is free, open, liberal, that is only a lip service. It is not imbibing the core content of this liberal and open, free way of thought, of way of looking at the world. And the value needs to be added to precisely this sense of freedom, the sense of liberty, which has enriched the thought of the people who belong to this tradition. Okay. And emphasizes again that it is precisely this freedom, this liberty, that is the condition of growth. That is the only condition of growth. Without that freedom, it is not possible for real growth to happen. Why? Because something, if it is thwarted under the name of discipline or whatever, prevents sincere, honest inquiry. And if something is resisting inquiry, be rest assured that there is some insecurity hidden that resists the shining of light on it, that resists the shining of reason and truth on it, and therefore there is something hidden which one does not want to expose to the light of reason, to the light of truth. It is precisely because of this that there are hidden pieces of darkness wherever somebody wants to force one's opinion on somebody else's. And that's why he says that is the only condition of growth. The idea that you can make others grow and help their growth, that you can direct and guide them, always retaining for yourself the freedom of the teacher, is nonsense. A dangerous lie which has retarded the growth of millions and millions of human beings in this world. Essentially, somebody arrogating to oneself a privileged position that, look, I am the teacher, or we are the teachers, and the others must submit themselves to be taught by me. Essentially, it involves a lack of introspection, a lack of self-analysis, a lack of a willingness to look within, to understand that, look, there are certain lacunae in my own understanding. It is this that gives rise to lack of openness and insecurity of one's own beliefs. Why? Because they are unexamined. Something which is not examined makes us feel insecure, so we want to cling to it. We do not want it subjected to inquiry. Why? Because we ourselves have not subjected it to inquiry. So we do not know whether it will resist inquiry or not. In other words, it's based on belief, not on truth. Truth is something that is universal. It can resist inquiry. It becomes stronger with inquiry. Two incidents that I have to mention. One of which is Ramakrishna's. He says, test what I say out. And Vivekananda said that at some stage, let no one feel hesitant if they cannot believe. I fought my master for 4 long years or 6 long years, and so I know every inch of the way. The point is, what is your motive? Is the motive to determine truth, or is the motive to establish one opinion over another? Establishing one opinion over another has very little value. It's just one opinion versus another opinion. Somebody smarter will come along at a future date, overthrow both opinions. It's of no value. Truth, on the other hand, is something that is objective. It does not depend on opinion. I have repeatedly said this. What is Vastu Tantra Jnana? What is Purusha Tantra Jnana? Opinion versus fact. Gravity, for instance, does not depend on your opinion. Given certain circumstances, natural bodies are going to act in a particular way. This is what natural laws are about. There are certain similar laws that guide the way our internal organism, the mind, and the psyche work. It's discovering these laws and acting according to them and living according to them that basically conduces to a good life. Nobody is going to be so stupid as to just walk off the top of a 3-story building just to see how it feels to fall down 3 floors. Why? Because one is clearly convinced that there is this, instinctively at least, that there is this law of gravity at work. It's going to act on my body, break it into a bunch of pieces. So it's understanding those laws, not in terms of just external nature, but also in terms of internal nature, which is the goal. The theology, the mythology, the stories, the doctrines, the dogmas, all secondary. But when we take the position of a teacher and essentially thrust our opinions, our ideas on others, what we are doing is essentially taking this limited perspective. Every individual's perspective, by definition, is necessarily limited. And instead of, say, putting it out there as something which has to be analyzed and taken apart, and people take as much of it or as little of it as they please, without giving them that freedom, once we start thrusting certain opinions of ourselves, certain ideas of ourselves on others, what we are doing is arrogating to ourselves this privilege of being a teacher, and we retain that freedom for ourselves. But at the same time, we deprive the person whom we claim we are teaching, we deprive that person of that freedom. And so, none of our teaching ever has any effect. Why? Because we forget this fundamental aspect of things, that liberty, freedom, is the only condition of growth. Thrusting something on somebody else only leads to stunted growth at best and sycophancy at worst. There is something it's either detrimental to the person who is taught in the first case, and in the second case, it's just plain dishonest. And then he comes back to this idea of freedom and liberty, not just in the spirit, but in terms of society, in terms of our investigations. All in every place. This is something that Vivekananda has been a champion of throughout his life. We in India allowed liberty in spiritual matters, and we have a tremendous spiritual power in religious thought even today. You, meaning the Western society, particularly UK and the USA, you grant the same liberty in social matters, and so have a splendid social organization. We have not given any freedom to the expansion of social matters, and ours is a cramped society. You have never given any freedom in religious matters, but with fire and sword have enforced your beliefs. And the result is that religion is a stunted, degenerated growth in the European mind. In India, we have to take off the shackles from society. In Europe, the chains must be taken off from the feet of spiritual progress. When will come a wonderful growth and development of man? If we discover that there is one unity running through all these developments, spiritual, moral, and social, we shall find that religion, in the fullest sense of the word, and I can't emphasize this more, in the fullest sense of the word, not some organized religion, not some bunch of beliefs you pass off as calling some package, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, whatever. But in the fullest sense of the word, which means essentially that which is universal to the human spirit, literally. In the fullest sense of the word, must come into society and into our everyday life. And then he makes this enigmatic and profound comment, which we shall return to next time. In the light of Vedanta, you will understand that all sciences, mind, all sciences are but manifestations of religion, and so is everything that exists in this world. It is precisely this all-encompassing view of all higher pursuits of human being, not doctrines, not dogmas, not theology, not mythology, not stories, but this pursuit of truth above everything else. Call that what you will. In our present society, when we look at various aspects of natural phenomena and regard the finding of truths as the highest goal to be pursued, we call it science. That's why he says this. In the light of Vedanta, you will understand that all sciences are but manifestations of religion, and so is everything that exists in this world. We'll take this up again next time. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanastu.